Bonjour, bonjour, and welcome to episode 21 of Paris in Bleu Blanc Rouge with me, Claudine Hemingway. It is a very rainy day here today in Paris. Last week, it was about 20 degrees warmer, and it was just the first few days of our heat wave. And thankfully, that is over, and it's going to be in the 60s this week and rain. And, I'm actually not too upset about it after last week. And if it's raining all day when I'm at home getting ready and recording the podcast, it's also just fine. It's all cozy. But today I wanted to share a story with you that has been in the news a little bit. It's been something that's been going on for years. And a lot of things that happen in Paris make the news internationally, of course, because it's Paris, one of the most visited cities in the world, and it's fantastic. But there is also a lot of times when things are in the news, especially the U.S. news about Paris, they're not exactly accurately described or shown, especially because there is a massive amount of clickbait anytime you use anything about Paris. I have been getting numerous messages from people, including people that I know, that have been sending me and asking me how Paris is and is it really as bad as everybody is saying? And I've just kind of responded and said, what are you talking about? I said, everything is kind of just fine and normal here. And it's because of this weekend, Paris Saint-Germain won the Championship League for the second year in a row, which is a really big deal. And when that happens, anytime there's a major sporting event, especially because it's football or, soccer for you Americans, it's a big thing, the people go crazy. And there is probably something just about every weekend or every other weekend where there's something where a car is set on fire or people jumping around, and it just gets a little crazy. So it just was like that a few weeks ago when they qualified for the finals and then they won, and the police in advance were like, you're not allowed on the Champs-Elysees. They closed the bars on the Champs-Elysees. Businesses boarded everything up because that is always the big place where everybody goes. And they, all of these businesses are trying to protect themselves, which is, that side of this is really horrible. The fact that these businesses get broken into and looted and everything, and not condoning this, obviously, in any way, shape, or form, but this is kind of normal. So here, it's been making a lot of news about what happened, but it is also just kind of what always happens when they have. And if the World Cup is coming up, and I'm sure France will do very well. And if that's the case, then it's going to happen again. It just happens all the time. And if there's protests, gilets jaunes, whatever it is. But with all that being said, yes, it probably looks, and especially the way the U.S. news wants to show it, they really beef it up for a little bit of the fear factor and to freak everybody out. But there is no reason to be afraid about coming to Paris. It's very isolated. That was in one evening, and since then it's been fine. And my biggest thing when I have clients that are coming to Paris and they're watching the news all the time and it's freaking them out, I say, just my number one rule of thumb is, as soon as your American news station says anything about Paris, change the channel. Just don't watch it, because whatever it is, or just watch it and take about 10% of it and just dial it back and just be calm, and then check the French news sources. They're not perfect either, but it's just very different the way it is construed on the U.S. media, and also, of course, online. So you could always message me and ask me, but literally the other day I was like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Everything's fine. Because that is also just kind of normal here. But everything's fine here. No worries about coming to Paris. It's any of those things, whether it is a demonstration or a strike or any of that stuff, it's always isolated. It's always isolated in one or two areas, and you could literally be 2 blocks away and not even know that it's going on. So it's just like that with anywhere in the U.S. If you saw that there was something happening in New York, you might message everybody in New York, but they probably would be telling you the same thing. What are you talking about? Because it is a big city, but Paris is, fantastic, and it always makes the news. And so that's just kind of my advice. Just, everything's fine. Everything's great here, other than it's pretty wet today, and it's Roland Garros. So that's always exciting. But there was this perfect storm of these concerts. You had Roland Garros, you had the Championship League game, everything all happening literally on one evening. And so it was also just this perfect storm of things going on. But what I want to talk to you about today, and I had a different plan for this week's, and then of course I decided after talking to a friend of mine that was here in town, I was talking about Notre-Dame and the controversy going on right now with the replacement of the windows, and I decided to move that up and do that today. And of course it sent me deep down a rabbit hole. And if you want to know how these things kind of come together, I usually, of course, have an idea, and I have this calendar that's just for the podcast, and I fill it up when there's like a date. I love anniversaries or any of those kinds of things. So I love to tie it into something, like if it's the whatever anniversary of something, or, you know, the anniversary of somebody's death or their birth or whichever historical event. But I will a lot of times share a story with you that, of course, I know something about, but then to share it with you, I want to go deep, deep, deep into it. And I need to work on my off switch. I'm not very good at the off switch, because even today, I was up working on this at 3 a.m. That doesn't sound so strange, because that's pretty much the time I wake up every day. But I literally have to tell myself at about 11 o'clock, like, stop, you no more, because otherwise this is going to be like a 3-hour episode. But I find these things, and then there's all these things that relate to it. And especially with this subject today, there's all these things that go along with this in the lead up to this and go behind the whole literally vandalism, the structural vandalism that is going on at Notre Dame and has gone on for a very long time. And most of this, it's crazy. You can't, even in these stories where they could easily equate some of these things in the past to help get their message out, or all of the books that I have about Notre Dame. There's so many of these things, and I'll tell you about it as we go, that aren't even listed or mentioned in some of these things. And so it just kind of boggles my mind. But of course, they also, they are probably, those writers are probably better at their off switch than I am, because I just need to find more. And there's things that I wanted to add to this that I stopped myself, and we'll do that in some other episodes, because when it comes to Notre Dame, I could go on and on and on and on for thousands of days about all the elements in there. But I think I did on the old podcast, I did a lot about the chapels and the decor and what everything means. And I think I'll do some of those again, but with even more information, because I am able to go much deeper here and share things with you. So I will do that. And if you have something in Notre Dame or anything, and you want to know more about it, or you have a question, send me an email, claudinehemingway@gmail.com, and let me know. Or if you want something that, you want me to do an episode on, let me know, and I'll add it to my big list. I probably add like 4 things at least a day to that list. But all of them I get really excited about. So let's just get in here today. I'll try that again, since I just knocked over the microphone. The restoration of Notre Dame after the 2019 fire was nothing short of a miracle. In just over 5 years, the cathedral opened its doors once more to the faithful, but in reality to millions of tourists. However, with any major project in France or anywhere in the world, there will always be a political or self-serving edge that sneaks in. On December 8, 2023, President Macron announced that the so-called urging of Bishop Laurent Ulrich has intended to add a new contemporary windows to the cathedral to reflect the fire and the Renaissance. At the time, it was thought that the windows might reflect the craftsmen and women and even the fire itself, but that was not at all what we would eventually see. Ulrich was named Bishop of Paris on April 26, 2022, and oversaw the restoration of the cathedral's interior, including its furniture and decoration. We were told by the diocese that whatever had been inside the cathedral on April 14, 2019, the day before the fire, would return. That has been far from true and a flat-out lie. Over the last 161 years since Viollet-le-Duc's restoration was completed in 1865, bishops and church officials have continued to erase his contributions. In creating this week's podcast episode, I wanted to take a deeper look at the controversy surrounding the new windows at Notre Dame, but as with anything, it led me down another road. The systematic vandalism of Notre Dame was done by the church officials who should be there to protect it. Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, the man behind the restoration of many of the French monuments, including the Basilique Saint-Denis, Notre-Dame de Paris, built in the 13th century, barely survived the many conflicts and the Revolution, but was thankfully saved when Victor Hugo wrote Notre-Dame de Paris in 1831. Suddenly, a light shone upon the cathedral, and a cry to save it from destruction sparked a competition among architects. Viollet-le-Duc was a self-taught architect, and his partner, Jean-Baptiste Lassus, had just finished restoring Sainte-Chapelle and were primed to take on this monumental task. Viollet was just 29 years old and already had extensive experience with Gothic churches. They wanted to preserve as many 13th century details as possible and restore each element in style. Viollet wasn't just an architect, but also an artist. He created meticulous drawings of each of the statues, gargoyles, kings, and stained glass windows. By hiring the best craftsmen in France, they could create each element lost over the years. Lassus died in 1857 during the construction, leaving Viollet with the huge task and the voices of critics, which to this day have never been silenced. The commission was awarded on March 31, 1844, and the project was completed in 1865. For over 20 years, Viollet-le-Duc had the spire rebuilt, redesigned the lead roof and the 16 statues of the apostles and the evangelists. He added gargoyles, returned the statues of the kings to the facade, and rebuilt much of the statuary around the doors of the cathedral. The inside is where his brilliance really shines, none more so than in the chapels, or the chapels before 1950, I should say. Viollet looked at each chapel as a canvas, one that would incorporate all elements combined that tell a story, including the translucent colored tapestry of stained glass. When Viollet took on this massive endeavor, the cathedral had suffered through the Revolution, the destruction of the original stained glass under Louis XV, and the near total loss when the city tried to sell the cathedral off for parts. Thankfully, there weren't any takers. Breathing new life also meant a return to color. The overall theme of a Gothic cathedral is light, the appearance of lightness that you see on the exterior, the capturing of the light that fills the interior, and the guiding principle of Viollet-le-Duc. In the words by the architect himself, first, the Cathedral of Paris, as is well known, is oriented in such a way that one entire side of the monument faces south and the other north. One of these sides, therefore, receives a brighter and more colorful light than the others. It seems necessary to take advantage of this arrangement to establish overall harmony. Rather than counteracting the orientation, it was deemed necessary to reinforce it. Thus, firstly, all the windows of the chapels facing south are decorated with griselle in warm tones, while those facing north have griselle in pearly and cool tones. From this, it follows that upon entering the monument, one sees one side in light, one side in shadow, one side warm and bright, the other side cold. That instinctively produces a generally tranquil effect on the eye. Nothing is more tiring for the eyes than an interior lit by the contrasting light of similar qualities in terms of light intensity, tonal value, and color. The paintings of the chapels had to naturally correspond to the system of light distribution. Following a general rule, the tonality of the paintings on the north side is cooler than that of the south side. However, as unity must be maintained from distant to distant on the south side, gray tones, green tones, and cool tones recall the general harmony of the north side, and on the northern side, warm tones recall the general harmony of the south side. Some look at the windows of the north and south nave that are predominantly gray or griselle and might think they aren't as beautiful as the type of colored stained glass you see in the Chevet or Sainte-Chapelle. Here is Viollet-le-Duc explaining his theory. Indeed, the colored light from the stained glass windows, even if they are, as we say, only griselle, breaks down the pure colors such as vermilion, yellow, and intense blue, weighing them down. It is necessary to counteract this influence by seeking tones that, on the contrary, acquire value from the translucent coloring of the stained glass window. Thus, for example, if the stained glass window spreads a light lilac glaze with a slightly azure tint and one wishes to obtain a blue tone, one must green the blue a purple tone, one must warm the lacquered tone with a yellow. A green tone, one must keep the tone very light and transparent. If, on the contrary, these stained glass windows color the light in a very slightly purplish yellow, the green tones must be almost blue, the blues azure, the yellows greenish, the red lacquered. When these muted tones have the proper value due to the light illuminating them, the touches of pure color take on their true value and are not, or rather do not appear to be, decomposed by the quality of the day. It is therefore useful, we believe, to consider the examples we give in the collection of paintings in light of the location of the chapels and consequently the light they receive. Thus, one will have the explanation of a certain harmony of muted tones. It is, of course, hard to envision this today in 2026 because the painted walls of the nave chapels were destroyed in the mid-20th century, less than 100 years after they were created. The Bishop of Paris, Marie-Dominique Auguste Sibor, wanted to restore the chapels and launched a fundraising campaign within the parish. Viollet-le-Duc, a lifelong atheist, was surprisingly close with the bishop, and the two developed a deep trust. The two began to create a plan for the names of the chapels and the themes of each, picking saints, figures, and those who had been attached to the church. The chapels of the nave were never part of the original plan of the 12th century church. During construction, wealthy guilds and families approached the church and said that they would pay to have a chapel built. Next thing you know, the wall of the nave and the transept was destroyed and bumped out, creating 14 chapels. It was up to the owner to decorate and maintain the interior, and most had carved wooden walls to close it in from the onlookers. To get the idea of this, visit Saint-Eustache. High above each chapel are the family crests of the original owner, and one chapel still has its lovely carved entrance. Once the church took over the chapels, there weren't enough funds to pay for the decoration or to bring it into the style of the rest of the church. That wouldn't be done until over 600 years after they were created. Each and every chapel of Notre-Dame was treated as its own little stage with every element working together, just as Viollet had described, from the altar to the gate to every painted element and, of course, the windows. Visit the Chevet chapels at the eastern end of the church to get an idea of his vision. For over 80 years, Notre-Dame basked in its colorful glory, weaving the stories of the saints and figures of the church with a beautiful motif that would inspire Art Nouveau and an American named Walt Disney. Then came the 1950s. A familiar story of neglect or poor cleaning led to a few loud voices claiming that the decor wasn't up to the standards of the great cathedral and it needed to be removed. Moisture, humidity, candle soot, and dirt, a problem churches still fight today, can have lasting effects that are hard to recover from. The fight was led by Pierre-Marie Ouzas, the Inspector General of Historic Monuments, who claimed the work was unworthy. The first victim was the wall of the northern nave just before the first chapel. A beautiful statue of the Virgin and Child that now greets you at the entrance was once against the wall that was painted a light yellow, blue, and brown motif with stylized fleur-de-lis, lilies, and reliquaries. Ouzas felt it took away from the statue, when in fact Viollet-le-Duc painted it to enhance the statue. In 1951, it was the first work to be erased. Prior to the fire, there was a large gift shop that was set up to the visitors leaving the cathedral. When the wall was stripped, there must have been some heavy furniture in the way, but they couldn't or didn't want to remove. Lucky for us, it has left a few reminders of what it once was. The lower part, painted with black and brown squares, remains and was found and restored after the fire. Bolstered by the success of their destruction, the chapels of the nave were next. One thing that Viollet-le-Duc did during his restoration was remove all of the Lemai's paintings that had remained in the church. Created in the mid-17th century, the Goldsmith Guild of Paris donated a large painting each year on May 1st for over 70 years. At one time, all 76 hung in the church and the nave. In the 1950s, Ouzas wanted to reunite many with the cathedral, for which they were created and would clash with the 19th century painted walls. The chapels of the nave were covered from the roof to the floor with decorative paint, something that wouldn't work with the reimagined chapels of Ouzas. A unanimous verdict by the historical group was that the artistic work, especially religious, during the Second Empire was considered uninteresting and without creative genius. There's always a political and self-serving angle that weaves its way in. So between 1959 and 1963, the 14 chapels of the nave were whitewashed of any color or decor. Entire chapels stripped down to the stone, including the altars. Today, in the second chapel of the north nave and the fourth, there is a little reminder of what once was. Today's Chapel of Abraham, once St. Charles, holds a bit of the green and burgundy harlequin pattern behind the statue of St. Francis Xavier baptizing. In the fourth chapel of Isaiah, below a statue of Saint Landry, Bishop of Paris, who founded the Hôtel Dieu, forest green, quote-unquote, stones outlined in cream in what once was the chapel of St. Vincent de Paul. I have photos on my website along with the original design from a fantastic book by Viollet-le-Duc and Maurice Audriot, featuring each of the chapel's design and ornaments. I have a link to the original online version from 1870 so you could see it yourself. Although the systematic destruction and vandalism occurred in the 1950s and 60s, there is very little photographic evidence that remains of what these chapels look like. Much like Chanel and their founders' ties to Nazism, Notre-Dame seems to want to also hide this period. I have many books about the history of Notre-Dame, and only a few even mention this episode, neither the original paintings nor the destruction. A few black and white images can be found that I'll have on my website, ClaudineHemingway.com. All of this brings us to the new controversy, but the past is also an important factor. Notre-Dame was designated a historic monument on December 31, 1862, during Viollet-le-Duc's work, a classification that protects all of the elements of the structure, including the art and decoration, whether it's in its original 12th or 13th century or created prior to the distinction. This also oversees how restoration is handled and how it must be overseen by the national architect and the respect taken to its heritage above all others. This, along with another incredibly important distinction, should protect the cathedral. On May 31, 1964, the Venice Charter was adopted by conservators and outlined the rules governing historic monuments and buildings. The 13 resolution outlines the protection, but also applies not only to the great works of art, but also to the modest work of the past, which have been acquired cultural significance with passing of time, as Article 1 states. The Venice Charter is one of the most important documents in the art world. It has been adopted as a rule not only for historic buildings, but also for the restoration of paintings and sculpture. Listen to episode 13 about Venus de Milo and 20 about Delacroix's Constantinople to know more. Two of the standout hits of the Charter that apply heavily to the conversation today. Article 8 is the items of sculpture, painting, or decoration which forms as an integral part of a monument may only be removed from it if this is the sole means of ensuring their preservation. Article 11, the valid contribution of all periods of the building of a monument must be respected, since unity of style is not the aim of restoration. When a building includes the superimposed work of different periods, the revealing of the underlying state can only be justified in the exceptional circumstances and when what is removed is of little interest, and the material which is brought to light is of great historical, archaeological, or aesthetic value, and its state of preservation is good enough to justify the action. Evaluation of the importance of the element involved and the decision on what may be destroyed cannot rest solely with the individual in charge of the work. I have a link also on my website I'm going to put there so you could read the Venice Charter on your own. The PDF goes to the English version, but if you follow it back to the link, it's available in like 60 different languages. Since Notre-Dame reopened in December 2024, the attacks on the chapels have continued. Before the fire, chapels were filled with numerous paintings, statues, candlesticks, reliquaries, and crucifix. Today, they are empty of any character, and there is nothing that ties them to the names given for the reopening. The idea of replacing the windows in the southern nave of Notre-Dame was first discussed in 2021 after the fire. Michel Aupetit, who was the archbishop at the time of the fire, placed the priest Gilles Drouin in charge of the redesign of the cathedral's interior. In a YouTube video I found, recorded March 22, 2022, Drouin talks about the chapels that had very little use, quote-unquote dead space, and giving them more life. They are far from that now. It was also at this time that the idea of the new contemporary windows for the south nave was first brought up by Drouin. With this idea reached the then Minister of Culture, Roselyne Bachelot, she said no and based her decision on the Venice Charter, as one should. On April 23, 2023, General Georges Alain and President Macron visited the Notre-Dame worksite, along with the Bishop Ulrich. Macron brought up his wish for the new stained glass windows and said to Ulrich, "It must come from you or it will never happen." On December 4th, 2023, 4 days before Macron visited the site again, Ulrich sent a letter regarding the windows. 4 days later, Macron announced his interest in replacing the windows. Exactly 1 year before the reopening, on December 8th, 2023, Macron first spoke of the desire to, quote-unquote, mark the 21st century. It was first said that the windows would also mark the 5 years since the fire, hoping it would be something like what you see in Notre-Dame de Paris. Maybe that was just my idea. At the same time, Macron announced their intent to replace the windows. He also expressed his wish to have a museum dedicated to Notre Dame opened at the Hôtel Dieu just outside the cathedral doors. The removed Viollet-le-Duc windows would be placed there. More on that in a minute. Shortly thereafter, on March 11, 2024, the Minister of Culture, now under Rachida Dati, named Bernard Blestin, former director of the Centre Pompidou, in charge of the international competition for the artists to create the new windows. It was swiftly brought to the floor of the National Assembly on December 19, 2023, by Caroline Colombier after Macron's announcement. On May 21, 2024, they concluded that the replacements of the governing body was accepted. On July 11, 2024, the National Heritage and Architectural Commission unanimously issued a negative opinion, a very rare occurrence. On December 18, 2024, President Macron announced the selection of French artist Claire Tabouret to create a set of 6 new windows. Born in 1981 in the south of France, she attended the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris for a year, then the Union School of Arts in New York. She now lives in Los Angeles. On that date, we saw our first glimpse of what the windows would look like. The chapels of the South Nave were renamed before the 2024 opening, representing the Pentecost, the visitors to walk out of the cathedral in the light. Although the chapels take their names of saints or figures tied to Paris, well, kind of. There's Saint-Joseph, Saint Thomas d'Aquin, Saint Clotilde, Saint Vincent de Paul, my girl, Saint Geneviève, and the fellow patron saint in Paris, Saint Denis, and ending with one that not many people know, Saint Paul Chen. A wonderful story of an amazing man that lived in the 19th century, but one that never came to Paris until his remains were transferred here in 1908 after he was beatified. This past winter, the artist's final design was put on display at the Grand Palais. The full-size painted version on paper of each window, along with the behind-the-scenes look at how they were created, hung on a white wall. The windows are reimagined, including the top of the windows, to pay homage to Viollet-le-Duc and the glass designer Alfred Jarrenté. I visited the exhibit the day it opened on December 10th, and of course, I went in with the idea of hating everything about their existence. On their own, they are lovely. They are bright and they are colorful, and the talent of the artist shines through. That being said, I still disagree with the entire idea of replacing these windows, if you haven't figured that out yet. The Archbishop of Paris chose the theme of the Pentecost, and specific texts from the Book of Acts were given to the artist. The chapel of Saint-Joseph is all gathered together in one place, and the apostles stand in a circle in front of the historic windows that are being removed. In the chapel of Saint Clotilde, suddenly a sound comes from the heaven. The windows are a rush of turbulent waters, while calm in the lower section. In the chapel of Saint Vincent de Paul, like a violent gust of wind, represented by a tree bending in the wind against a bright orange background. In the chapel of Saint Geneviève, the tongues of fire appeared to them and rested on each of them. At first, I was excited because I thought she depicted Saint Geneviève, as that would make more sense. But it is actually the Virgin Mary dressed in her signature blue. She's depicted with long, loose hair, often more associated with Mary Magdalene. In the chapel of Saint Denis, those who heard had their hearts pierced. The Holy Spirit now appears as a dove above the design of the former windows. Mary in blue stands and looks up as the apostles are on their knees below. In the last chapel of St. Paul Chen, they spoke according to the gift of the Spirit. A long procession made up of people winds its way through the windows and into the future. I've added a link to the exhibit information on my website. It's in French, but you could open it up and, maybe shoot it with your Google Translate from your phone. The fight against the windows sped up at the start of the year. Didier Reignited of Le Tribune de l'Art leading the fight, creating a petition on December 12, 2003, and as of today has more than 352,000 signatures. You too could sign it, and I'll put the link on my website. Notre-Dame gave their approval on February 24, 2026, an email sent that day from the rector. They have no standing on anything outside of what is involved and affects the worship, but I guess they think that's going to help. On April 17, 2026, the regional prefecture authorized a public establishment to remove the Viollet-le-Duc windows. May 5, 2026, two heritage defense associations brought a case before the Paris Administrative Court to halt the project as a matter of urgency. They had to show that the urgency of the situation, the legality, and a raise double of the legality of the project. At 3 p.m. on May 12, 2026, Didier Rignier and Paul Lacaze of Sites et Monuments and SOS Paris had their day in the Paris Administrative Court, pleading that the replacement of the windows must be stopped. 1 week later, on May 19th, the Administrative Court rejected the suspension of work by the Sites and Monuments and SOS Paris. The judge didn't see the urgency since the structure itself will not be altered and the windows can be removed. The lawyers for the project argued that 121 square meters out of 2,050 square meters, which is 6% of the 19th century window and 5% of the overall windows, are what is at stake here. When a high percentage of those windows are high above and out of view of the visitors, I think it's a weak argument. Not all hope is lost, and the side of the historic interests remain optimistic that they could prevail, even if it's long after the windows are replaced. On May 22nd, it was announced that the windows will now be displayed at the Château de Pierrefonds and the Architectural Museum at the Trocadero. The Château de Pierrefonds was renovated by Viollet-le-Duc under Napoleon III from 1857 to 1879. 4 of the windows are said to be installed there with an explanation of their creation. The other 2 at the Trocadero, where the remains and copies of historic cathedrals and chateaux, make sense. In May of 2026, the chapels of the South began to show signs of work. Paintings were covered and then protected in a metal cage. Statues covered and the wood-carved walls of the chapel of Saint Vincent de Paul were hidden behind plywood. I don't really know why they spent that much money to cover it when it would actually just be easier to take the paintings down. I have pictures, quite a few pictures of that. And so make sure to check my Instagram and my website. Removal work would begin on June 22nd, and installation of the new glass will not begin until October and be completed by the second anniversary in December. The new windows designed and painted by Torberet will be created by the Atelier Saint-Marc, the oldest atelier of stained glass, which opened in 1640, will take on the project this summer. The new stained glass windows will be placed into the existing framework, and the exact dimensions of Viollet-le-Duc's windows will be used. So the judge deems there's no emergency to stop the project, which also leaves this open. Once the windows are in place within the state-owned cathedral, they become a public work, which also makes them more difficult to change or remove. And the cost of all of this, you might ask? At least 4 million euros paid by the state. This is not the first time the stained glass windows in Notre-Dame have sparked controversy. In many ways, the 2 cases are very familiar, but the earlier one is never mentioned in the press or in Notre-Dame history. In 2020, a remarkable discovery was made in the gallery above Notre-Dame. Long-lost stained glass panels dating to 1935. These fragments were sent to the manufacturer Vincent Betti for analysis, reigniting interest in a lesser-known chapter of the cathedral's history. In the 1930s, stained glass artist Louis Baillet was tasked with selecting artists for Notre Dame's new stained glass windows. However, the project faced resistance. The 19th century Viollet-le-Duc windows were criticized for being too pale and not aligning with the cathedral's Gothic aesthetic. Despite these challenges, 12 artists looked at the project, funding much of it themselves in hope of leaving a lasting mark on one of the most iconic landmarks. The artistic exhibition of their designs at the Pontifical Pavilion in 1937 to gather support. Yet the Commission for Historical Monuments rejected them, citing inconsistencies in design, proportion, and color. World War II would further derail this project, leaving much of the work incomplete. While plans were initially made to replace Viollet-le-Duc's windows to Notre Dame, including updates to the 13th century rose window, fragments of these windows remain today. Of the original 12 windows, only a few pieces of one of the small rose windows and an almost complete bay survive. Notably, Jacques Le Chevalier's design were among the few that were retained and reinstalled in 1965. Not everyone agreed to replace the Viollet-le-Duc windows. Gabriel Robert, the Grand Inspector of Historical Monuments, believed they were in fine condition and did not require replacements. Similarly, the vice president of the L'Observatoire de l'Art Français opposed the removal of these unique art pieces. Again, this is also, remember, before the Venice Charter. Following the devastating 2019 fire, all stained glass windows were found intact, aside from minor heat damage to the small rose window at the high gable. Restoration efforts began focusing on cleaning, analyzing, and refiring the glass using modern techniques. Of the 12 original artists, only works by Le Chevalier and Herbert Stevens were shown and exist today. The Chevalier family returned one of the windows to Notre-Dame in 2013 to commemorate the cathedral's 850th anniversary, later donating it to the Stained Glass Museum in Troyes. Additionally, crates of never-fired glass panels were discovered post-fire, offering a glimpse into this artist's incomplete vision. I have photos and a video I made of the exhibition of these windows at the Stained Glass Museum in Troyes that I went to in the summer of 2025 and have links on my website. If you get the chance to go down there, if you love stained glass, this is the place for you to go. This small medieval town of Troyes that's in the Champagne region has more than a third of the stained glass of France can be found in this town, and the churches are just incredible. As for the museum dedicated to Notre Dame, I mentioned earlier, on the same day in December 2023, when Macron announced his wish for the new windows, he also mentioned the creation of the museum dedicated to Notre Dame. A fantastic idea, in my opinion. There are thousands of items not on display within the cathedral and scattered across museums in France, not to mention all the items they removed and never returned after the restoration. Just across the Parvis, the Hôtel Dieu, the oldest hospital in Europe, which covers a massive city block all the way to the Seine. Only a fraction is actually used, and it's only used for emergencies. However, the project did not make it very far. The Paris City Council didn't even tee up the project, as it would have to go through a lengthy process of changing the local urban planning scheme. There has been little to no word since March of 2025. The work was to begin this year, with completion and opening in 2028. They haven't even opened the competition for an architect. This project will most likely never happen. Maybe they should use that 4 million euros that the windows are costing for this to start the project. Notre Dame has a difficult line to follow. It is once again the most visited monument in France. Following the fire, the crowds have returned in record numbers. However, Notre Dame is still a cathedral, and it's a religious structure. It is also a state-owned structure, but the interior is run by the church. These days, I think they are leaning further towards tourism with a heavy dash of self-interest than they are as a cathedral. I love Notre Dame, and I have been obsessed with the history and architecture of this beautiful cathedral long before I ever set foot inside. I just hope that the history can survive a few more generations before it's completely erased. In France, the country's history and heritage are among its greatest gifts. Every year, hundreds of French people line up for a glimpse inside the many buildings only open 1 weekend a year. This is why the systematic destruction is so surprising. All wrapped up into a few people's ego and self-interest that will destroy something meant to be seen by future generations. We really hope that doesn't happen, and I hope that they can actually stop this project or reverse it later and return the windows of Viollet-le-Duc. But after everything I've told you, and when you know that he actually designed all of the chapels to work together, every one of those stained glass windows is different. They have the same structural properties as far as the griselle work, which means it's the stained glass. It's, in kind of a gray. There's also, you have the cool tones on the north side, the warm tones on the south side, which are a lot more reds and yellows and oranges. And it's you could see the difference when you walk by. The windows aren't overpowering, but if you know, especially after I told you the way that he describes it, by if the light coming through hits this blue and it's going onto the window or onto the wall and it's lilac. It's just, it all worked together. And in one way, absolutely none of that remains. And so the argument of saying that these need to stay is a hard one, but also nobody knows of why exactly what these actually used to look like, which is crazy. I was shocked that I could only find 4 or 5, and they're black and white, and they're from a distance of what some of these chapels look like. So everything that Viollet-le-Duc did, one after another, they're getting removed. The other bishop, Lucier, he actually also removed quite a few things instead, including the choir gate, the altar that Viollet-le-Duc created. he had a lot of other things removed, and it's in a way, of course, these people want to leave their little mark on there, but I just don't think they should be doing it in a way that's erasing the history. The artist Torre, she said that, this is a living monument. Why should it be, stuck in the past? Something to that general feeling. But, I of course she's going to say that. She's the artist creating new windows. But, they changed so much already. The chapels now, the nave chapels, are just these sterile white boxes with tapestries on the north side that are being loaned until new ones are made. Luckily, the paintings returned, and all the 13 lamés that were there before the fire returned. And that's about the only thing. But it's just kind of sad when you go into a church like Saint-Sulpice, one of my very favorite church, and you see the chapels. It's the Saint Denis Chapel, and the walls are the story of Saint Denis, and it all works together. There is none of that in Notre Dame as far as the nave chapels. And it's even kind of up in the air in the back of the Chevette. Some of the walls are equate to, they've kept some of the names, like the Mary Magdalene Chapel, but they've also added other names to each one of these. And so it is, I love it, and I just hope that they remain and respect the history of that church that's over 850 years old. And there was a lot of people that came before him. And it is surprising, if this was in the United States, this would be, of course, they're erasing everything and putting up their own ego. But this is France, and they kind of usually don't do that, and they really respect the history. So I will keep you updated, and I'm going to go there that week and see. There's tarps. I'll put pictures. I was in there the other morning. I took some video there. You can't see anything, but I did see the workers coming in after mass to start working, and they're making a bunch of noise in there. But the windows are supposedly not supposed to come out till June 22nd. So we shall see. We probably won't be able to see anything, but maybe I'll go there and protest it. Probably not, but I will go there and I'll give them some evil faces. Anyway, make sure, there's so much stuff. I'm going to also put a link to the petition you could sign on my website, and lots of other links and photos to go along with this, so you could check it out yourself. And definitely, if there's something you want to know more about, and I'll go into some of the other stuff at Notre Dame, and then in a way you could you could take some of those with you and visit the cathedral itself with a much deeper look at the history. But definitely check out the pictures and check out the link. I think most people could see it, of the pictures of the book. I found this book years and years ago with all of the designs of either chapel. When I was in there the other day, I was holding it up and taking pictures. You'll see the pictures. And I had a handful of people kept coming up to me asking me what it was. And then I was telling them about what happened, and they didn't know about this controversy. But, I'll make sure people know. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I think this was a long one, but think of how much longer it would have been if I put everything in there that I wanted to. So I will see you all next week, and hopefully I know what we're doing. I've already kind of started it, but as long as I don't get waylaid into another idea, I'll see you next Tuesday with a story about the oldest bridge in Paris and what is happening right now.